Welcome to the Rock is George podcast. I'm your host, George Dionne, and this is episode 72. Thank you for tuning in to the Rock is George podcast on your favorite podcast streaming app or through our website, rockisgeorge.com, on our YouTube page, or at knac.com, the loudest.com on the planet. While you're over on our website, make sure to click through, check out all our other interviews. We got some great musicians from diverse backgrounds and genres. I think you'll really enjoy what we have available at the Rock is George podcast, as well as at knac.com. My guest for episode 72 is STEVE GASPÁR of the Hollywood AllStars. Steve has put together a fantastic ensemble of musicians for this project. Steve's going to go into a little bit of how the band was put together, kind of the musicians' backgrounds, and how they play into the sound of the Hollywood AllStars. Steve's promoting their latest EP, Field of Grace. I believe I refer to it as Fields of Grace during our interview, so for that I apologize, Steve. Field of Grace came out on August 26th through Deco Entertainment, and we're going to find out more about it in just a minute. So here's STEVE GASPÁR of the Hollywood AllStars. If I knew absolutely nothing about the Hollywood AllStars, how would you describe the band's music to me?
I would describe it as a reincarnation of Blood, Sweat, and Tears. If Blood, Sweat, and Tears were to arrive on the scene today, taking into account the directions that the music, not only the business, but music in terms of the art form has taken, that's probably the closest likeness I would find stylistically to the band. You know, obviously I understand everything needs to be put on a shelf and it's not exactly like Blood, Sweat, and Tears, but I think that will at least give people an idea of what they'll be getting into when they pick up the CD.
And you have an all-star cast of musicians on this album, ranging from members of Blood, Sweat, and Tears to Johnny and Edgar Winter and plenty of blues and soul musicians. How did you kind of assemble the all-stars?
George, about 5 or 6 years ago, I had this idea to form a passion project of mine. And through a lot of my connections in the industry and as well as people I've recorded and toured with, I decided that I want to put together this band and sent out a bunch of phone calls and decided to see how people would react to it. And at the time, never imagined that 5 years later, I'd be sitting here speaking with you, telling you I've got the horn section that did the Rolling Stones Steel Wheels tour, the bass player that worked with Johnny and Edgar Winter, the lead vocalist from Tower of Power, and it goes on, and it's just really been a dream come true. The band did start off in the beginning as sort of as a cover band, and we were playing songs that by many of the artists that we'd all worked with. However, we did put our own spin on them. Then the pandemic hits, and obviously the world is shut down. No one can tour, no one can do anything. And at that point, I realized if I want to take this act to the next level, it meant writing for it and recording some original material. And that's really was the basis and the beginning of the Field of Grace EP that's being released next week.
Now, the Hollywood part of the Hollywood AllStars comes from your nickname, am I correct?
That is correct. That's a long story in itself. But yeah, my publishing company is Hollywood Music East because I've been located on the East Coast primarily. And when it came time to put a moniker on the band, I figured what better one than the Hollywood AllStars. And it really is an all-star cast in the truest sense of the word.
You have your debut EP coming out on August 26th through Deco Entertainment. Is the EP sort of a preview of things to come?
I would hope so. I mean, you know, it's funny, George. I mean, when we started doing this, I had 3 songs written, and obviously I'm not going to put out a 3-song EP, but through a series of events, a couple more songs were added to it. So we had a 5-song project, which just for giggles, I started shopping around to a couple of industry friends of mine and hadn't even heard of Deco at the time. And through another gentleman that I'm a musician friend of mine, Steve Luongo, who was responsible for putting together some of John Entwistle's catalog from The Who. And that was signed to Deco. And he said to me, Steve, this is a really cool boutique label. They're really cool people. I would suggest you send them the project just to see what they think. And I did that, George, and I was very pleasantly surprised when they were blown over by it and wanted it and jumped right on board. And I feel like I've got a family with them in a very short period of time. They've been wonderful.
Yeah, you kind of fall in line with the artists that Deco covers. They got the Bouchard brothers from Blue Oyster Cult, and they have Carmine Appice from Rod Stewart. It's sort of that kind of tie-in for you guys.
Yes, and and what's interesting, in addition to that, they've got a great jazz arranger, Gil Evans, Tiffany, the female pop star from the 80s. So it really is a really eclectic blend of music. And that's sort of what turned me on to them, that they are really all about the music and all about the art. And that was, the kind of label I wanted to associate the project with.
Well, let's talk about one of the lead singles coming off the EP, Fields of Grace. If you want to talk a little bit about how that song came together, or maybe what it's about.
Field of Grace is sort of a modern take on a breakup song. I mean, we've all been in relationships where in the beginning, love is wonderful and it's all blue skies and everything is hunky-dory. And in many instances, unfortunately, things take a turn and you begin to ask yourself, whatever happened to our field of grace? What happened to that feeling we had in the very beginning? And it's sort of, I like to describe it as a mini movie. And the video sort of pinpoints that a little bit, that in the beginning, everything is great. And then the fights begin. And in this particular song, by the time we get to the guitar solo, you can actually see the relationship going up in flames. So it was my take on that, like a modern love / breakup song.
You have a cover of probably one of the greatest movie songs of the 80s, James Brown's Living in America, and you actually played for James Brown. Is that correct?
Yes, I did. I had the fortune to work with him when he was doing a couple of shows in Connecticut many years ago. And, again, before the Hollywood AllStars was signed, I was posting stuff all over social media and was very fortunate to bump into on social media the writer of that song, the great Charlie Midnight. Charlie wrote Living in America with Dan Hartman, who is no longer with us. But Dan used to live in Connecticut. I knew Dan, certainly was very familiar with the extent of his career, not only with Edgar Winter, but in his solo career. Charlie, of course, has written for numerous artists, produced Joe Cocker, and is a legend in his own right. And he became a big fan of the band. Now, what's even more interesting, as I'm speaking with Charlie and in my mind thinking, well, maybe we should add a fifth song, my horn section, the Uptown Horns, played on the original track that James Brown sang. So all of this stuff is coming together synergistically with the writer, the horn section. And I thought to myself, I think that song, it speaks as well to the climate of our world today, maybe more so than it did in '85 with all this going on now politically and socioeconomically. Maybe this is a great time to remind people America still is the greatest country in the world, which is sort of at the heart of what that song is. Charlie gave us his blessing. And obviously, the minute it was finished, I sent it to him before I even sent it to Deco. And he said, Steve, I love it. You gave enough of a tip of the hat to the original, but you made it a little bit more powerful, which is our vibe. And you know what, George, I think, and I don't want to speak too far, put the cart before the horse. I think that could be an excellent choice for a second single when the time comes. So yeah, there's a lot in the works, and I enjoyed working on that track immensely.
Another powerful track is the song Trust Me, and you have, I don't want to pronounce her name wrong. It's Chevy Chevis?
Chevy Chevis. Yeah, Chevy is an incredible singer. I located in New Jersey, but obviously travels all over the world. Has worked with Madonna, Adele, Beyonce. I mean, she has a stellar career as a background vocalist. In addition, has her own entertainment company. And, she, does a lot of very high profile events in Manhattan and New Jersey and really all over the East Coast. She came in and killed that song. Now, the interesting thing about Trust Me, which was written by the Uptown Horns, when the Uptown Horns originally recorded it, one of the acts they played with was Jay Giles. Well, they got Peter Wolf from the Jay Giles band to do the vocal on it. So when they presented it to me, I was listening to Peter Wolf singing this great song and thought to myself, as timely as it is, that song could be equally as well done by a female point of view, a female perspective now, with the woman saying, you have to trust me, forget my past, forget what went on then, but, trust me. And, it came together beautifully. And I think Chevy killed it. She did a lot of prep work and came into the studio and just left us with our jaws on the floor.
You got two more songs on the EP. We might as well talk about both of them. You got The River is another pretty emotional tune.
Yeah, The River is really at the heart and soul of what I love as a songwriter. I started my career writing love songs back in the 70s, and I've always had an affinity for being a classically trained pianist for those big piano ballads. However, wanted to keep it a little bit more in vein with what the band was doing. And I think it turned out really well. I mean, it's been described to me, and not by my own description, but a couple of vocalists that have heard it, as sort of a cross between a great Van Morrison or Ray Charles ballad. And got the idea for that song, obviously, I mentioned earlier during the pandemic. But, we're losing so many people. And it was my reminder to everyone that that's going to happen to all of us at one point, but we have to hold on to what we have and let's not lose sight of all the good stuff while we're here.
Absolutely. And you got a nice little fun track to round out the EP. You kind of call back to the 70s kind of spirit, at least with the title and the chorus. What good is your body if you ain't got no soul?
Yeah, you know what, George? I think you hit that one on the head. That I'll tell you, that was sort of my little tongue-in-cheek song about all the plastic surgery people are going through now. Not that I'm adverse to a nip or a tuck here or there. It's not that I say that in a disparaging way, but it's sort of funny with people so concerned with social media and TikTok about how everyone looks, and we have all these filters, and we have people going in for butt lifts and face lifts and plumping up your lips and plumping up your hips. That it's what's in your heart that's the most important thing. That's what the soul aspect of that song was. What good is your body if you ain't got no soul? But could be perceived as soul music as well, which, yes, you're absolutely right. It harkens back to the 70s kind of soul, funky soul groove. Absolutely.
You have a big album release party coming up next Friday, I believe, at the Sacred Heart Community Theater.
Yes, that's it. It's an interesting theater, George. It was a movie theater for years and years, right in the heart of downtown Fairfield, Connecticut. And one of the local universities, Sacred Heart University, bought the theater a couple of years ago and did a complete remodel of it. It's absolutely gorgeous, and turned it into a really cool concert venue. And they still do show movies there, but they have comedians, bands of all different genres, jazz bands coming in, our band, all kinds of different comedians. Paul Reiser is going to be doing a show there in the next several weeks. I'm very anxious to play there. We haven't worked there yet, but I did go and scope the place out, and it looks like it's going to be a fun night. That's next Friday, the 26th.
This interview will air well after the gig, so we'll just say it was awesome and it was the greatest show ever.
It was, and we had a ball.
What can we expect from a set list when you guys head out and play a show? Obviously, it's more than 5 songs from the EP.
Correct. And we still are doing some of those. Our bass player, Scott Spray, has worked with both Johnny and Edgar Winter. So it's not unlikely that we would throw in an Edgar Winter song. The horn section has worked with the Rolling Stones. We might throw in a Rolling Stones song. Our drummer, Lee Finkelstein, has worked with the Blues Brothers. So sometimes there might be a Blues Brothers song. So we try to round out the set, obviously with songs that will be appropriate with our originals. But again, songs by artists that we've all worked with and we could have fun with and do our own little take on them. Typically, our show is, 75 to 90 minutes. And I'm hopeful that, as this record comes out and we start, hopefully from our mouths to God's ears, 1 or 2 of the songs blow up in a couple of different markets and allow us the opportunity to, expand our audience.
For the Sacred Heart show, I see that you're bringing your wife, Suzanne.
Yes, correct, George. I mean, it's funny. Before she was my wife, and this goes back many, many years, we were signed by a record producer here in Connecticut. His name was Paul Lecca. Paul was a legend in this area, wrote the song Green Tambourine for the Lemon Pipers, wrote that song Na Na Hey Hey, which is played at every ball game and has been covered by everyone all over the world. As a producer, produced Harry Chapin's Cats in the Cradle album. Paul was just an extraordinary songwriter, producer, and all-round musician. He got a hold of us when we were just young teenagers and liked what he heard and really cultivated us in the very beginning. And he got us signed to Columbia Records back in the day for a singles deal. And that's how Sue and I met. And we've been together ever since.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your music career from Steve and Suzanne to the Hollywood AllStars. Did you primarily work as a touring musician in that time period? I really couldn't find any recorded music by you in that time gap.
Yes, a lot of the stuff that we did, they were tours. I most recently worked with Gene Cornish from the Rascals. Again, this was pre-pandemic. And, you know, as you may or may not know, in the midst of us doing this stuff with Gene, he was doing a couple of shows with Felix as well from the Rascals and suffered a heart attack on stage. Gene is, I'm happy to say, is doing very well. I don't think he's been back out on stage yet, but that was most recently. Obviously, these shows, you'll see cell phone videos and stuff, but no, I hadn't recorded with a lot of these artists. They were more live shows and touring situations.
You mentioned Hollywood Music East is your publishing company. You want to talk a little bit about putting that together and what they do?
Yeah, again, in the midst of all this touring, I really never lost my desire and my passion for songwriting and was recording and writing and pitching songs all throughout this, 15, 20-year span. And was very fortunate. I had a couple of songs placed on American Idol records, maybe one of the more notable ones. The year that Fantasia won, there was, I think the third runner-up was an incredible singer named LaToya London. LaToya got signed to Peak Records. I had a song on that record. Some of the other writers on that project were David Foster, Barry Eastman. I mean, it was very heady company, and I felt very fortunate to be included. In all of this pitching and recording, I needed to have these songs published, and I figured I may as well do it myself rather than sign everything over to a publisher. I was working as hard as anyone else could promoting my own catalog, and that's when I started Hollywood Music East, which is my BMI publishing company. It's primarily focusing on my own catalog. We don't really, pitch other people's material.
You are an ambassador for the New England Music Hall of Fame. How did you earn that role, and kind of what is the kind of way that the New England Hall of Fame works?
They have a really cool mission, and I was just recently made aware of them by a gentleman named Christopher Anino. We did a show, a breast cancer benefit in June, and about a month prior to that show, Chris contacted me and said, your horn section is being inducted into the New England Music Hall of Fame. Would you consider letting us do the induction ceremony at your concert? And obviously, I welcomed the opportunity. And at that point, Christopher and I got to know a little bit more about each other, and he became more aware of my background and said, would you be amenable to me appointing you as an ambassador? We'd love to have you come on board. And yes, I welcomed the opportunity. And it's a really great organization. They're trying to promote everything from opera to rock to blues. I mean, they really are expanding the scope of the kind of music that they represent. So I think there's a lot of growth to be had with that particular organization over the next few months.
And you inducted in your horn section into the Hall of Fame, correct?
Yeah, the Uptown Horns. I mean, they're four really incredible guys. I mean, you know what, George? I could say this. It's my band, the Hollywood AllStars, is a 13-piece thing, which is almost unheard of these days. I mean, just economically, it's next to impossible to make this thing happen. But everyone in it is extremely talented, but more importantly, really, really wonderful human beings. And this horn section is an example. These four guys are amazing. And when you consider they've been on stage with the Rolling Stones, and I mean, their discography is ridiculous. I always sort of begin and end at the Rolling Stones, because if you're on stage with the Stones, what more can you say? Yeah, we could say Bonnie Raitt, Mick Jagger, Robert Plant, and all these other wonderful artists that they've worked with. But they are the most humble, nice, easygoing group of gentlemen, not to mention a really tight horn section.
Is the Hollywood AllStars going to be something that you're going to try to keep together as the same ensemble, or do you see it as something that's going to have to rotate because everybody's working musicians?
Well, that's a very interesting point, and it's a good point. Yes, it does happen that I may book a show and the drummer is in Vienna with the Blues Brothers, or, when Johnny Winter was alive, Scott was pretty much exclusively out with Johnny all the time. stuff like that happens. And, I do have on the record, I'm living in America track, as a matter of fact. I don't know if you're familiar with Will Lee, but he's just a world renowned bass player. Probably most notably, in addition to the thousands of records he's been on, he was the bass player on the David Letterman show, The World's Most Dangerous Band with Paul Schaefer forever. So he's playing bass on Living in America. The drummer on that track is Tony Cintron, who's worked with Joe Bonamassa and Ricky Martin. The point I'm trying to make is I do have built into the project a couple of, I don't want to call them subs, but they're also on the record. So to your point, if there's a date that maybe Scott can't make, it would be lovely for me to call Will Lee and say, would you like to do this show with us? And to the promoter, you're still getting someone on the record. It's not like this is a quote unquote sub. So I have taken that into account here and there. And it's probably one of the trickier things I have to go through with this band is the juggling of schedules, for sure.
You yourself, you're a working musician. I know that the Hollywood Stars has you tied up with a lot of things right now, but are you planning on playing with other bands as you continue forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And another friend of mine who we've known each other forever and ever, Jay Stallman, he's currently living in Florida. He's actually the person that put me together with Gene Cornish for that Groovin' tour. He started an act after Gene left, and we kept a lot of the Rascals repertoire together and a lot of the 60s and 70s stuff together, and put an act together called Groovin' on Tour, which I still work with. Still do some local stuff. Obviously, just because of time constraints, this has been taking up all my time. I'm doing this all on my own so far. And at this point now, after getting signed and am beginning to feel like I might be a little in over my head. So I'm hoping that either through management or agents, I can start getting a little help promoting the Hollywood AllStars, which at that point would leave me free if, something else came up that I wanted to do.
Have you found doing a project like this all on your own, there's some red tape that you didn't anticipate and trying to get things forward? Because I know, today radio isn't really an option for a lot of artists unless they're on a major label or something like that.
Oh, absolutely, George. I mean, from the simplest thing, back in the day, and I don't want to date myself, but, you put out a black vinyl record. And there was SoundScan, which scanned the sales at the record store. And you belonged to a performance rights organization to collect your radio airplay. And maybe your mechanicals came from the record company. It was all sort of in a box, and it was sort of doable. Nowadays, between trying to track the digital streaming on all of the different services, trying to keep mechanicals together for those people that do buy physical product, it's gotten so complicated and so out of control. And the amount of singles that are released every day to Spotify and Pandora is, I forget the number. I should remember this because I've been asked this on other interviews. It's hundreds and hundreds a day are uploaded to Spotify. It really does become overwhelming. Deco, fortunately for me, has taken over a large part of the manufacturing aspect of the workload. But yeah, it's a lot. It really is. I don't want to say out of control, but I could see how an artist, even in today's climate, after having try to learn from the mistakes that all of the artists in the 50s and 60s made where they weren't collecting all of their money, how it still is very possible for people to be, left out in the cold. And somebody else read me something the other day about forget who the writer was, but like 15 million streams. If you want to picture a song getting 15 million streams, he collected a check for $1,700. Something is still way out of whack. And I guess one of the benefits of me doing this at my age now, after having had somewhat of a career in music, it's not about the money for me anymore. If I get a check for $32 from my performance rights organization, great. I could go buy a half a tank of gas. But at this point, I'm doing this, George, because I really do believe in the music. And I believe that Deco believes in it as well. So, I mean, the rest is left in God's hands. If something happens to click or go viral by some fluke, great. I would welcome that with open arms, and I'd be certainly willing to go out and tour with this band.
That's all the questions I have for you today, Steve. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the podcast. The new EP is Fields of Grace. It'll be out August 26th. It sounds fantastic. Nice slice of blues and soul music.
George, thank you very much. I appreciate it, and especially for taking the time to check it out and listen.
Once again, I want to thank Steve Gaspár of the Hollywood AllStars for coming on the Rock is George podcast. Be sure to check out their latest EP, Field of Grace, on your favorite streaming music app. If you like what you hear, make sure you buy a physical copy of the album. Support the artist. For all things Hollywood AllStars, head over to thehollywoodallstars.net. I also want to thank Hadley Wolfram of Chipster PR for making this interview possible. You've been great. I've been George Dionne. I'll see you again soon.